Nick, I read the book in Galis and absolutely loved it,
Oh, I'm delighted.
even though I'm not a runner.
Well, the book is supposed to be for people who aren't runners. Despite the title and the marketing, it is also a book for non-runners.
Yes, and I want to kind of start with that.
Yeah.
Because you say something that for me, in a way, sums up what non-runners can get from the book. You write that with running, you began to understand the connections between the mental process one uses to run faster and the mental process one uses to get through anything hard.
Yeah.
And that the lessons you learn in the sport, the discipline, the self-awareness, understanding life's rhythms, help you get through major life challenges.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
tell us about a life challenge that everything you learned from running helped you get through.
So running, like one of the things I learned, part of the process of writing this book was to understand what I've gotten from running, why I've run so much, what it's done for me. And one of the things you learn is that, or one of the things I learned was that there's this daily habit, it's almost this daily stoicism, this, I'm going to just keep going forward on whatever project I have, and I'm going to go every day and I'm going to go out and do it. Because when you run, it's one of the things I read a lot about in the book, you learn that even if you can't measure it and even if you can't feel it, you are getting better. If you go and you run every day, you are getting faster. You are getting stronger, right? But what you have to do is you have to do it, right? You don't get stronger if you run 3 days a week or 4 days a week, right? You do get stronger if you go out there and you go when it's cold and you go when it's hot and you go when it's windy and you go there's a storm. And so you learn this kind of stoic discipline that is really helpful for, let's say you're writing a book, right? Or let's say you're trying to help your kid through something, right? Or let's say you're dealing with any of the other traumas in life. The way to do it and the way to handle it, or one way to handle it that I think works pretty well, is to say, this isn't going to solve it today. I'm not going to figure out this problem, but I'm going to work on it for a certain period of time. And when I'm done, I'm going to trust that I'm closer to the solution than I was at the beginning.
That's incredible, because you say also, which is connected to that, that as you run, your attention shifts inward, which seems paradoxical.
Right.
And as you go faster, your head empties.
Yeah.
Mind and matter briefly become one, which sounds really mystical. So you walk us through this process of how this totally physical sport at some point becomes metaphysical.
Yeah. So there are different mental states that I get to while I'm running, but one is it's kind of meditative, and I go out, and I think this is important for someone who doesn't run or someone who runs a little bit. People often ask me, like, what should I do on my next run? You should go out and just pay attention to what you can hear, right? Or just pay attention to what you can see or what you can smell, right? Or just pay attention to your breathing, right? And there are ways that you can turn running into a very meditative process, right? Because you're out in the world, you're in the trees, you're out on the road. Think about everything that's around you. You get this great sensory awareness. So that's part of what I love about running. The second thing you mentioned is a different mental state. And that's a state that I get to kind of at the end of a race, right? And there, you don't have the brain power to focus on what you can smell or hear. You can't hear anything, right? At the end of a marathon, there'll be times where I'm running, you're running around Central Park South, and afterwards a friend will be like, I was cheering for you so loud at mile 25. I had my sign, I was screaming. And oh, really? That's great, thanks. Your mind has like completely shut down everything because there's no energy left. And so all you are is just, it's like your whole essence of your being has been collapsed, right? Like right now, I'm here, I'm present in the world. I can feel that there are people over here. I have some awareness of this. And at the end of a race, there's nothing, right? And you're just like, you're locked into this human body moving forward. And there are parts of that state that are incredible. There are parts of that state that are scary. There are parts of the state that hurt a lot, but it's an interesting state to get to.
And it's also like connected to what you also wrote about how when you're really good at something, when you master something, it gives you the confidence to master other things.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do think that learning, not that I've mastered running, but I've certainly spent a lot of time focused on it and have, improved a lot over the years. It gives you learn the kind of the sets of habits and the skills that you can take to master other things. I do sometimes wonder whether, the thousands of hours I spent playing guitar as a kid were and very focused and very intent on getting better and learning exactly how this instrument works, were useful to helping me understand how to become a better runner.
But does it also work in reverse? Like when you went through thyroid cancer in your 30s and you couldn't run for a period, did everything you had learned from running help get through that challenge?
I think so. At that point in my life, though, I wasn't as an intense runner, and I didn't have.
But you were running.
I was fast, but I didn't really have a deep understanding of it. I don't think.
Yes.
I had run. I got thyroid cancer when I was 30 years old, and I had just run one fast marathon.
Yeah, but still, that's more than.
It's more than most people have tried.
99% of the world does.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of interesting ways that running relates to thyroid cancer, and one is that, so I went through this process, and maybe it was 6 months from when I got diagnosed to multiple surgeries and radiation treatment, and then I'm kind of out the door, and I go out and I try to run again, and I can't do it at all. And both it's physical, right? I've been physically wiped out, right? But running is also this interesting neurological process. You have to remember how your body moves through space. And I had lost that too. And so when I started to train again I was diagnosed in November, December 2005, and I started training again by the summer of 2006. You're relearning the whole process of what it means to move quickly, and it takes a long time to build it back.
Like how long?
Well, so I started to probably took me a year from the diagnosis until I could run reasonably well. And then I started to run fast again kind of the next January, February. And then the wonderful thing, and I start the book with this, is, I ran the 2005 New York Marathon, my first fast marathon, in 2 hours, 43 minutes, 51 seconds. And then 2 years later, I ran it again in 2 hours, 43 minutes, 38 seconds. And so the whole process, this 2-year process, had made me 13 seconds faster, half a second per mile exactly, which is lovely. And so it really took me 2 years to be back exactly where I was.
I really want to stress for anybody listening who is in their 30s or even 40s or even 50s, what you can achieve at any age. So at age 44, you ran a marathon in 2 hours and 29 minutes, making you one of the fastest marathoners your age in the world.
Yeah.
2 years later, you set an American age group record in the 50K. A few years after that, you became the top-ranked runner in the world in your age group in the 50 mile.
Yeah.
This would have been incredible achievements for somebody who was just focusing on running.
Well,
but in the meantime, you're a writer, you're an editor-in-chief, you're now the CEO of The Atlantic. So tell us about that. Tell us about how do you manage.
well, I think that anybody who was a full-time runner would probably burn themselves out before age 50. Like one of the nice things about having an intense job, and I say this half in jest, but I actually cannot physically train so much that I destroy myself. There isn't enough time. But the way I handle it, so there are a couple ways I handle it, because I do think this is important and interesting, and it's part of the book. I do think there's skills that are transferable, right? So you learn how to focus on a 2-hour run, it helps you in a 2-hour board meeting. You learn how to focus in a 2-hour board meeting, it helps you in a 2-hour run, right? So there's some transference of skills, right? Secondly, there's a whole set of habits that you learn, right? The fact that I'm running every day means that I am not drinking at night, right?
Yes.
Right? And it means that I am prioritizing my sleep, which I've been told is important, right? And that helps you during the day at your work, and it helps you when you go, the things you need to do to perform as a high-level athlete are similar and overlap. There's some ways that they compete with each other, but they do overlap with what you need to do to be good at your job. and then there are like practices that you learn. I mentioned the sort of the Stoic philosophy of like so there are things you learn. But there is a time pressure and there is time competition, and I can't pretend it doesn't exist. So I try to be hyper efficient about it. So I ran to the office this morning. I didn't take the subway. I ran in, right? I showered upstairs, right? I kept my clothes in the office.
Yes.
Yesterday I was off. I had to do an event in Las Vegas. And so I ran, 8 or 10 miles in the morning, during which I listened to a really interesting AI podcast and filmed my daily video on the most interesting thing in tech in the middle of the run, because this idea came to me. And so this was actually pretty interesting. I took my phone, I took the case off, and I like stuffed it into the kind of the side of a palm tree because I needed a place to put it flat, right? And so you learn certain efficiencies. And so I run, I map all my runs on an app called Strava. Pretty much every year it says I've run 3,000 miles. Like, that's a lot of time, right? And it's a lot of time that I could be spending doing other stuff. But it's also time that I wasn't commuting. Sometimes it's time where I'm, listening to things. Sometimes it's time where I'm opening up my mind. And some of the skills I learned while I do it.
You're not doom scrolling the news.
Right. Yeah. Right. If running is distracting me from Instagram, then
fantastic.
Great.
Yes. Or
I mean, this is kind of interesting. We talk about how everybody is distracted all the time. Right? We're all on TikTok. Look at the number of people who run marathons every year. So at the same time that everybody's distracted, we're also spending 4 or 5 hours running marathons nonstop. So kind of like that.
I know. I love that. We should be talking more about it.
Yeah.
Because it also prevents you from doing a lot of things that are ultimately self-destructive.
Yeah.
I mean, drinking the occasional glass of wine is not self-destructive, but people can find themselves drinking much more than that to distress or to handle, the end of the day stresses. And so look at all that. You haven't drunk anything for how long now? How many years?
Well, I haven't been drunk. I mean, I haven't drunk alcohol since last night, but I haven't been drunk, 10 years or something.
No,
like that.
I don't mean drunk. Like you haven't, so you do occasionally have.
I do occasionally drink, but I haven't drunk to excess since.
Yes, and of course if you are wearing your Oura ring or your Whoop or your Apple Watch, you immediately see the impact on your sleep.
Yeah.
So the thing about running is that you have very quantifiable benchmarks. Mm-hmm. What about life? Does it kind of teach you to look at benchmarks in life as well?
There's an interesting dichotomy in that I do keep very quantifiable benchmarks in running, right? And I do track my workouts, and I figure out my pace based on how I've done the exact same workout. Like this morning, I did a workout on the way in, and I compared it to the other, let's say, 15 times I've done that workout over the last 5 years, same thing. And I get a sense of where I stack up, and then I can look at those past 15 times and see how fast I raced, right? And then you get a sense of where you are and what, how fast you should go out in your next race. I actually don't keep very good benchmarks on the rest of my life. I don't have I track the benchmarks for the Atlantic, right? How many subscribers do we have? What's our advertising revenue? What is the subscription propensity of somebody who comes in from a certain subreddit, right? But I don't keep metrics on my life. I just keep metrics that matter to the job.
Do you have any benchmarks you want to reach, either in running or your life, like 5 years from now or a year from now?
I actually don't. I don't have any benchmarks that I don't have a specific benchmark. I would like the Atlantic we have a subscription target, we have an advertising target, we have all kinds of benchmarks that lead up to it. I play a role in it. But those are Atlantic benchmarks, and those are the only other ones I have besides my running ones. And
any running benchmarks?
Well, I would like to set another American record. I tried really hard to set the American record in the 50 mile, and I almost got it. It was in April, and it was this race in Connecticut, and it was around a lake. It was like 7 times around Lake Warramog, and the way races are measured, it's the shortest distance that you could possibly run it. But of course, when you're running around a lake and there are cars, you can't run the shortest distance because sometimes you have to kind of go wide on the curve so you don't get run over, right? And so when I had run 50.0 miles, I was ahead of the American record. But because I had added an extra half mile of avoiding cars and all that, when I finished the race, which is what counts, did not have it. So I was very close. but I didn't get it. So I'd like to try again either for that or another record.
And I just want for everybody watching and listening to know that you were 50 in July.
Yeah, I was 50 in July. Oh, and actually that one I cared about. I really wanted to break a 5-minute mile on my 50th birthday. And I wanted to do it with my middle son, who's a very fast kid. And so we went out and we ran, and I ran a 4:53 mile on my 50th birthday and was very happy.
And what did he do?
So he ran with me until 1,200 meters, and then he got confused because we were in Prospect Park, and he thought we were only halfway through, and he was too tired, and he thought we were halfway through and going like 5:05 pace, as opposed to 3/4 through and going 4:53 pace, and so he dropped out. And then he was like, wait. He's like, the finish was over there? I was like, dude, it's just down the hill by the fire hydrant. He was like, oh. So I think this spring on a track, he'll cook me. Right now at like a 200 meter, he'd destroy me. A 400 meter, he'd destroy me. A mile, maybe a little ahead of him. A marathon, I'm way ahead of him. He'll cook me in all of them in 5 years, and probably this summer he'll start cooking me in the mile.
So he has the same passion that you have for running?
No, he's got the passion for soccer that I have for running. It just so happens that he's also a really good runner.
That's kind of interesting because you also write in the book very movingly about your father.
Yeah.
Who sounds like an incredible character. I mean,
you would have gotten along with him.
Oh my God.
You and he would have like found each other at a party and just started talking. Yeah.
And tell us about him.
All right, so he's an amazing guy and a very complicated guy. So he grows up mostly in Oklahoma with some time in Providence, Rhode Island, and part of his life's in California, but Oklahoma is the key period. And he's the son of this domineering, physically imposing, Golden Gloves boxing champion minister. And my dad is kind of quiet, likes classical music, kind of sort of wants to sing and doesn't want to go outside and play baseball. So he's very scared of his father. And he also wants to get out of Oklahoma. And so he hears about the school called Phillips Academy, Andover, and he delivers newspaper on horseback, right, and gets enough money. So he wins a 3/4 scholarship, pays the rest with the money he's made from his little horseback business, and goes to Andover, right? So now he's a scholarship kid at Andover. He's got all the wrong clothes. He doesn't fit in. He gets picked on, but he then starts working really hard. Last kid to turn out the lights, gets really good grades, starts to fit in, gets a scholarship to Stanford, and then he's just stratospheric, right? And I later found letters of recommendation where the provost of Stanford is like, this is the best kid we've had since Herbert Hoover. Kids like this come along every 10 years. He goes and he runs all the political clubs. He brings John Kennedy to campus. He brings Richard Nixon to campus. He wins a Rhodes Scholarship, right? So he goes to Oxford with a Rhodes Scholarship, comes back, marries my mother. My mother is from a prominent DC, New York political family. It's like my dad is like on track, right? He's going to be president of the United States of America, right? Like there's a huge photograph of him in Life magazine, right, of this kid. And so he comes back and he's got his PhD, he's married, and then everything kind of doesn't work, right? And he doesn't get the jobs he thinks he's going to get, doesn't get the fellowship he thinks he's going to get, buys a house in New Hampshire because he thinks he might run for the Senate in New Hampshire, but like that never comes on, gets going, and he starts drinking too much. He starts to sort of stress in his diary about like all his career failures and what is he doing, and maybe he's not smart enough, he's certainly not focused enough. And then he starts to realize, fortunately he has me and my sisters, and then he realizes he's gay. And so he comes out of the closet in the early 1980s. He leaves my mother, comes out of the closet, and moves to Washington. And he's actually an interesting civil rights pioneer in a little bit. He's like the first openly gay Republican presidential appointee. But then, he suddenly has this like crazy sex addiction. He says he doesn't spend a night alone for 20 years, right? He's coming to my house and like order prostitutes. He's dating like totally inappropriate people, dates this devious kleptomaniac who like kills my sister's cat, tries to kill my dog, like drags me across, like just nasty guy. He dates this other guy, this interior designer, who convinces him to like paint the swimming pool black, but then all these animals fall in and die, and like it's a weird situation. I actually went by the house that he used to live in, and the old owner was like, "Why are you looking at the house?" I was like, "Oh, I used to live here." And we got in a conversation. I was like, "Just so you know, there's probably a bunch of like stolen statues like buried underground because my dad used to date a kleptomaniac who used to go around auction houses in Virginia and steal stuff and then bury it here. And after he left, we found a bunch of stuff and then we sold the house. So who knows? Anyway, so my dad has this crazy life and then he moves to Asia. He moves to the Philippines, Bali, he lives in Thailand. And then he is running this hotel in Bali that's it's kind of a hotel, but it's kind of not. It's kind of like for men who want to sleep with the gardeners, right? And the gardeners are kind of on call to sleep with the clients. And so people would say, what do your parents do for a living? I'd be like, oh, my mom is an art historian. My dad runs a brothel in Bali. And, he dies of a heart attack in 2017, and he was living then in the Philippines and Bali. So he's got this amazing story, this kind of this arc and this fall and all kinds of hostility, thousands of lawsuits, totally bankrupt. He's always like calling me up to borrow $200. It doesn't pay his taxes. All these debt collectors are always calling me. But he's never boring. He's like so fun to talk to. Everybody loves talking to him. He's interesting, his life stories, he engages, he listens, he's quick-witted, he's funny, he's so bright, he still reads all the time. So he's and he's devoted to me, right? He like loves me so much, even though like I'm always like, Dad, can you like just please date someone who's over 18? Just like to kind of tire this, I have a father-in-law who I'm older than, right? He married all kinds of people at different points. Like maybe 20 times he claimed he married somebody, but once he actually got it approved by the United States of America, gay marriage pioneer in Massachusetts. So total lunatic, but also in many ways a good father to me.
And first of all, the way you're telling the story is so engrossing, even though I've read a lot of it in the book. But also kind of, you're describing it all in a very stoic way.
Yeah.
But this was your father. So what emotional impact did all this have on you?
There were times where, I don't know, right? It's hard to, maybe it's easier to read other people's emotions than your own emotions. I do think that the way I chose at a very early age that I was going to have a positive relationship with him and that I was not going to be bothered, right? And if he ordered, like, if he came back, if we were, we lived together, and if he came back and like brought a whole bunch of prostitutes from DuPont Circle and they were doing whatever they were doing in one part of the house, I'll be on my laptop in the other part of my house just like doing my work, right? I'm just gonna like be me and like you be you, Dad, right? And I kind of just made peace with the fact that I was going to have a positive relationship with him and it would be all right. And like occasionally I would cross a line and I get upset with him, but and I didn't love him always, like mooching money off me. It's not a great thing for your dad to be like basically blackmailing you, or multiple times he was like, I'm going to kill myself if you don't give me $500, right? Which is a lot to put on your child. But I made a deal. And I think it affected my demeanor. Like you kind of just roll with whatever happens. And so I once was in one of the skills I have in life is that I am very good at dealing with impossible people and just kind of rolling with it, particularly like high performing impossible people. And so when I interviewed to be editor of the Washington Monthly, which was my first big journalistic breakthrough, the editor-in-chief was like, well, what is your relationship like with your father? And I was like, well, my dad's a crazy alcoholic and we get along great. And the editor-in-chief, he didn't tell me at the time, but his thought was, I'm an alcoholic and I need someone who will monitor me. So sounds great. Like this kid's hired. So turned out it was like turned out it was professional edge to have had Scott Thompson as my dad.
But it sounds as though you're like a descendant of Marcus Aurelius, describing how he dealt with equanimity, with plagues and invasions and betrayals. I mean, it's not easy.
No, but you either deal with it with equanimity or you deal with it with passion and emotional chaos and
falling apart.
If there's this amazing thing in my I don't know whether equanimity is definitely either it's my greatest weakness or my greatest virtue. There's an amazing little diary entry. My older sister, incredibly smart, one of the smartest people I've ever met. She's only a year older. We're basically twins. She's 18 months older. And she deals with, she deals with much more passion, right? And I kind of like lower the temperature and she's more likely to raise it. And there's like different approaches to how you get through life. And, but there's an amazing diary entry that my dad has when I was like 2 and she was 3, right? And his diary entry is like, everything would be better if we could get Nikki to feel a little bit more and Phyllis to feel a little bit less.
Wow.
Right? And so I don't know to what degree it was hardwired into me. I don't know whether the kind of respond to chaos by being calm was genetic, whether it was forced by dealing with my dad, whether it's because I'm a middle child, who knows? But they're definitely like, there have been people who've critiqued me and say, come on, like get a little like angrier. Like David Remnick used to say this, right? Like come on, like what's going on? Like wake up, like, be a little more passionate about this thing. So, maybe I could have used a little dosage of that too.
Well, I think we all need a little bit of more equanimity right now. So I personally have always aspired to more equanimity. So I love that.
But you also know from all the people you've watched that sometimes it's not a good thing, right? It can be a good thing, it can be the opposite.
Well, I think it's not, equanimity doesn't mean indifference or neutrality or not responding to things. It's just how do you respond?
Well, okay, I'll tell you how it can go wrong though. So this is a very funny story. But my wife is also a little bit like me, right? And we sometimes we've been married for 25 years, we've never really had an argument. But because we're always trying to make things right for the other person, we once had this amazing revelation where we were talking about the car. We bought a Honda Fit like 3 years before. We'd had this conversation, and we each had said, oh yeah, we wanted to get a Honda Fit, but maybe we should get a Subaru Forester. And we had this realization that actually we had both wanted to get the Subaru Forester, but had thought the other wanted to get the Honda Fit, so had pretended to want to get the Honda Fit. So we had actually through our trying to please, had ended up with the outcome that neither of us had wanted. And that's what can go wrong if you're sometimes if you defer too much and you try to make peace, you end up with the wrong outcome.
No, but then once you saw that, have you changed how you
Now we scream at each other all the time. No. So we try to make sure we're not making the same mistake again.
So tell us about how your relationship with your father and running intersect. Mm-hmm. Because there is a great connection there.
There's a great connection. So he starts running in the late 1970s as things are kind of spinning out of control for him, right? As he is, recognizing his sexuality, trying to grapple with that. He's drinking too much. It's the running boom. Everybody's running in the late 1970s, right? It's when America starts really running. And so he starts to do it. And in 1980, I was 5 years old. And so he starts taking me running, right? And we go and we run a mile. I think we ran 2 or 3 miles, which now having had multiple 5-year-olds seems improbable, right? I don't even know how I ran a mile, but I definitely ran a mile when I was 5 with him. So he introduces me to running. Then when I'm 7, I watch him run the New York Marathon. It's this wonderful moment. I write a little essay about it for the school anthology. And then I don't run that much. When I go and see him between age 7 and 15, we'll go running together, and I have little diaries that I found which talk about going running with him. And we would run a bit. He sort of slowed down his marathoning, and then I also go to Andover just like he did, and I get cut from the basketball team and I start running, and then I realize I'm good at it. And so from then on, we run together, but he's also cheering me on as it becomes clear that I have this talent and this ability. And then in my 20s, as I start to run marathons, he's desperate for me to run faster than he did. He was not competitive at all, just wanted me to break the time that he had run. And he just loved the success I had as a runner. And it was one of the ways we connected and could keep talking to each other.
You have a great line in the book that you started running to become your father, and you continued running to avoid becoming your father. Yeah,
it's true. I mean, that was one of the realizations that made me want to write the book. So the reason I wrote the book is because I had this sense from looking at my own life that the things that make you fast or slow and the things that determine how you run are buried deep inside and are pretty interesting, right? And to me, part of that realization was realizing, I run. Why do I run so much? Nick, why are you doing this? Oh, because your greatest fear in life is becoming like what your dad was at the end of his life, right? Like, when I was a young man, I wanted to be like my dad, right? I wanted to go to the same school as God. I wanted to be a Rhodes Scholar like him, right? Like, I wanted to be all the things that the young Scott Thompson had been. And then as I watched his later years, it was the opposite, right? I'm like, wait, no, don't let that happen to me, right? Like, I know I have the same genes. I know I kind of look like him. I know I kind of act like him in a lot of ways. Like, I'm not going to, sort of let these things overpower me. And so I'm going to stay disciplined and focused, and running is going to be part of that.
And as well as telling your dad's story as a runner, you tell the stories of 5 runners that you've met in your journey.
Yeah.
And you write that they show us how running can help us both escape and find our way home, which is a line I absolutely love.
Nice.
So the escape part is clear, we get it. But how does running help you find your way home?
Well, it helps you find your sense of who you are and help you uncover, like, who is the person you are meant to be and what you should be. So I tell the story in the book of, it was actually the hardest, like, structural question in the book was, it's not like a biography of Nick, right? It's not a biography of my father. It's a story about running. And so I wanted to include other people, but I didn't want to include just people I'd never met or didn't know.
Yes.
I wanted to include people who had intense relationships with running, whose lives had intersected with mine. And so the first is this woman, Bobby Gibb, and she was the first woman to run the Boston Marathon, right? She's in, where is she? She's this incredible woman, Bobby. And she started running the most spiritual, wonderful way possible, where she gets her parents' RV, like they're away for the summer, and she drives across America, and every night she'll just go and run for hours in whatever park she finds. She'll sleep under the stars, and then she'll drive to the next one, right? And it's the most beautiful way anybody has ever trained for a marathon. And then she, women aren't allowed. The organizers say it's not physically possible for a woman to run a marathon. Bobby has run like 65 miles out with horses. Like, she's like, what do you mean I can't run a marathon? I just ran 65 miles with a horse, right? I can certainly run with men. And so she sneaks into the race. Like, she hides in the bushes. She sneaks in the race. She's wearing her brother's sweatshirt. She takes it off in the middle. She's wearing a bathing suit and like little like nurse's slippers. And she runs like a 3-hour, 19-minute marathon in 1965. But she comes into the book, right, not just because she's amazing and she has this wonderful spiritual sense of running, but because she's the mother of a friend of mine. And she's there at my high school graduation when my drunken father storms the stage when I win a big award. The second character is Tony Ruiz, who's a Olympic level athlete for Puerto Rico, lives in New York. And when Puerto Rico boycotts the 1980 Olympics, he can't handle it. He's frustrated. He's going to the University of Puerto Rico down there. He comes back to New York, and he falls into really hard drug addiction, and robs his own home, tries to kill himself, has this neck slit out at Coney Island, out on the boardwalk one night, and he's basically at the edge of death, and then he decides he's going to come clean, and he starts to find more in his running, and then he becomes a coach. And he, in fact, becomes my coach, right? When I'm 30 years old and I'm in New York. And I don't know his story then. I just know this is Tony. Tony coaches the Central Park Track Club. He's a great guy. He tells me to run with my arms, like less high, right? And then we become friends, and I learn his story. And it's a story about a man who's really, really got to the precipice and literally tried to kill himself jumping off a building and hit the railing and fell back. And so didn't, or I think he got one leg across, right? A guy who's come as close to the most horrible ending as you can get, and now running is a way of find your way home. Running is a way for him to stay centered and to stay clean, as he has for the last 40 years. So there are 5 characters who have their own stories and meaning, and they're all spaced into the book. So Bobby comes in when I graduate from high school, and Tony comes in when I start running with the Central Park Track Club. So each of them comes in at a different point in the narrative.
And it's beautifully done, and you really
Thanks.
Get totally immersed in their stories.
Good. It was structurally I need to go back. I finished my first draft of the book in August of 2023, so 26 months ago. And in that draft, the characters weren't specific chapters. They just sort of popped in and out. So Bobby appeared in 5 different chapters, and Tony appeared in there are all these other people in that version who I've taken out, right? The book is it's very short. It's a short book, right? You can get through it, right? The goal is...
You can get through it, and you should get through it.
Yes, thank you. I cut, I think it's like 75,000 words. I cut probably 65,000 words,
No.
right? Yeah. I cut tons of material just because I was relentless, like nothing that isn't like related to the core themes and the core message. Like I'm only gonna have these 5 characters. And so, it could have been a 400-page book, but then I just want it to be a very information-dense book and something that people can really get through in one sitting.
It's information, but it's also wisdom.
Yeah, I hope so.
And there is a lot of information and data, we are swimming in it, but there is very little wisdom in the world we're living in right now. And that's definitely what appeals to me, as well as the incredible storytelling. It has to become a movie.
Thank you, Arianna. From your mouth to God's ears.
There is a lot in the book about mortality and death, which is one of the topics I'm obsessed with. And not just because of your own experience with cancer and the death of your father, but just, the story you just mentioned now. So there is a passage that I really love. You write, we get through most days in life without having to really think about death, which also means that we don't spend a lot of time dwelling on the remarkable fact that we are alive. So how do you see that? I love the fact that ancient Romans used to carve on statues and trees, kind of memento mori, not out of morbidity, but in order to remember how amazing it is to be alive.
Yeah. That passage is describing how I felt at the end of the 2007 New York Marathon when I realized that I had run faster than I'd run before I got sick and before I had really confronted death. And there's something about running that brought mortality closer to my mind, in part because when I would run, that was when I would think more about my sickness and when I had, faced this real risk for the first time, in part because when you run, you push yourself to the limits in a way you don't, you reach a state that is, I suppose, in a way closer to death than the state you reach at other points. So you reach the point of total body collapse, right? And in a way, you're maximally alive. You've put your full life force into it. Another way, you've totally burnt yourself out. So there are ways that running, certainly with the intensity that I run, kind of brings you closer to death. And then there's this, I do think it's true that, as you say with Memento Mori, or as Steve Jobs said in his famous Stanford commencement address, death is probably the single best invention of life. That once you recognize that there's an end point, you pay more attention to what you're doing in the everyday. Yeah,
that's why I think this obsession in Silicon Valley with longevity kind of misses the point of how death can add to life.
I mean, I'd like to live as long as I can, but yes.
But it's longevity and health span, but not immortality, which is kind of the assumption behind a lot of the efforts. So let me just end by saying that in my 20s, I was dating a theater critic in London, where I lived. And he wrote a review of a play called Look Back in Anger. And he started the review the way I would like to start a review of your book, if I was writing a review, which I will. He wrote, I could not love anyone who does not love Look Back in Anger.
Oh my God.
So I could not love anyone who does not love The Running Ground. It's an amazing book. Please read it. Please share it. Thank you for writing it.
Oh my God, I can't believe. Thank you so much, Arianna.
Thank you.
Wow, that was a